Welcome to Enigma of the Unknown, where chilling true stories become haunting whispers in the dark. As the holiday season approaches, the warmth and joy of Christmas bring light to the cold winter nights. But not all stories of Santa Claus are filled with cheer. Some wear a twisted mask beneath the red suit, hiding darkness within the holiday spirit. In today's video, we're uncovering 4 terrifying tales of horror that took place on Christmas Eve across America. Stories that will make you think twice about the jolly old figure in red. Prepare yourself for a journey into the dark side of Christmas. Story number 1. Mass deaths at the Boston orphanage, 1943. In 1943, as World War II raged on, Boston lay buried under a harsh winter. Snow blanketed everything, the narrow streets, the old, dignified houses. On the outskirts of the city, a worn-down orphanage stood quietly amidst fields of white snow. Its red brick walls had faded with time. The frosted windows were dim, and the gray, tiled roof added to the scene's somberness. Inside, however, the children's laughter and chatter broke the winter silence. Despite the hardships and scarcity, the children eagerly anticipated Christmas. Sarah, a 10-year-old with deep blue eyes and lightly curled brown hair, stood by the window gazing at the gray sky. She was one of the oldest children at the orphanage, always looking out for the younger ones. "Sarah, do you think Santa will come this year?" asked 6-year-old Tommy, his face smeared with dirt. Tugging gently at her hand, Sarah smiled softly. "Of course, Tommy. Santa always knows how hard we've tried all year. But we don't have a tree, or any presents," sighed Mary, an 8-year-old girl. "The important thing is that we have each other, right?" Sarah comforted them. "We're going to make this Christmas special." But deep down, Sarah knew the orphanage was facing more struggles than ever. The war had cut off funding, and food and clothing were in short supply. Mrs. Miller, the orphanage's matron, worked tirelessly to care for the children, but there was only so much she could do. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah went to the kitchen to help Mrs. Miller with the dishes. "Do you think we'll have a Christmas celebration this year, Mrs. Miller?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Miller sighed, the exhaustion visible in her eyes. "I'm not sure, Sarah, but I'll do my best to bring some joy to you all." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Sarah offered. "You've already helped me so much, dear. Just keep taking care of the little ones. That's all I ask." Mrs. Miller gently stroked Sarah's hair, a warm smile lighting up her tired face. The next morning, a strange letter arrived at the orphanage. Mrs. Miller opened it, and her expression shifted from surprise to joy. "Children, gather around," she called out. The children crowded around her, eyes wide with curiosity. "What's happening, Mrs. Miller?" one of them asked. "I just received a letter from a kind man. He says he wants to visit us on Christmas Eve and bring gifts for each and every one of you." Cheers erupted, and their faces lit up with excitement. "Santa! Santa's coming!" they shouted, dancing and hugging each other. Sarah felt a wave of relief and joy wash over her. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Miller." "It certainly is, Sarah. This Christmas might be more special than we expected." But there was a trace of worry in Mrs. Miller's eyes that Sarah couldn't quite place. In the days that followed, the orphanage was filled with a new sense of anticipation. The children decorated the dining room with simple crafts, colored paper, old ribbons, and snowflakes cut from paper. Laughter and excited voices filled the air, driving away the winter chill. Yet at night, Sarah struggled to sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the wind howling through the window frames. A feeling of unease stirred inside her, like a dark cloud slowly looming over the orphanage. "It's probably just me worrying too much," she whispered to herself, trying to close her eyes. In a fitful dream, Sarah found herself standing in a field of snow. In the distance, a figure dressed as Santa Claus approached her, but his face was blurred, and his eyes were like 2 bottomless pits, staring straight at her. Sarah woke up with a start, her heart pounding. "Just a dream," she breathed, wiping the sweat from her brow. Finally, Christmas Eve arrived. Snow fell heavily, covering the path leading to the orphanage. The children gathered in the dining room, dressed in their nicest clothes. The sound of the doorbell broke the quiet. "I'll go answer it," Mrs. Miller said, trying to keep her voice steady. She stepped outside, and when she opened the door, a gust of icy wind swept in, revealing a tall, shadowy figure. "Hello, everyone. Santa has arrived." A deep, warm voice echoed, but there was something off about it. The man stepped inside, dressed in a red suit, but it looked worn and dusty. His long white beard hid most of his face, revealing only his cold, deep-set eyes. The children cheered, running up to him. "Santa! Santa!" they shouted in excitement. Sarah stood back, feeling a strange unease creeping over her. She stared at the man dressed as Santa, trying to figure out what made her so anxious. When his gaze met hers, she felt a shiver run down her spine. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice deep and slightly chilling. Hello," she stammered. "How do you know my name?" Santa chuckled lightly. "Santa knows the names of all the good children." Mrs. Miller stepped forward, breaking the tense moment. "Children, let's all sit down and receive your gifts from Santa." The celebration continued with laughter and music. Santa handed out presents and candy to each child, but Sarah couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. When he approached her, she noticed that his eyes were anything but warm. They were cold and hollow. "This is for you." Santa handed her a small box wrapped in red paper. "Open it when the time comes." "What time?" Sarah asked, but he had already turned away without a response. As the night wound down, Santa bid farewell and left the orphanage. The children, exhausted but happy, drifted off to sleep, clutching their new gifts. Sarah sat on her bed, staring at the gift box. Finally, she decided to open it. Inside was an old-fashioned doll dressed in white lace, but its face was cracked, and its glassy eyes stared back at her, empty and soulless. A chill ran down her spine. Why would he give me this? She set the doll aside, lying down and trying to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come easily. In the darkness, she thought she heard a faint whisper, as if from a distant place. "Sarah, Sarah." She bolted upright, looking around the room. All the other children were fast asleep. "Who's there?" she whispered. There was no reply, only the sound of the wind outside. "Must be my imagination." Sarah tried to reassure herself, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Outside the window, a shadowy figure stood silently watching, his cold eyes gleaming in the dark. After a Christmas Eve filled with anticipation, the children at the orphanage were buzzing with joy upon hearing that Santa Claus would be visiting. The news spread quickly, making the atmosphere in the orphanage livelier than ever. The innocent faces lit up with excitement, and laughter echoed through the cold hallways. Despite still feeling uneasy after her strange dream, Sarah tried to join in the collective joy. She and the other children decorated the dining room with homemade ribbons and paper snowflakes. Each of them contributed to make the orphanage feel warmer during the frigid winter. That afternoon, as snow began to fall heavily, Mrs. Miller gathered all the children in the large living room. "Children, Santa will be here soon. Get ready to welcome him," she said, trying to hide the hint of worry in her voice. A knock sounded at the door, heavy and steady, like the pounding of a racing heart. The door creaked open, revealing a tall figure standing amidst the swirling snow. Santa stepped inside, bringing with him a cold gust of wind and an indescribable sense of unease. His suit looked worn, the red faded to a dull gray. His hat was pulled low, concealing half of his face, leaving only his dark, sunken eyes visible. His white beard was thin and disheveled, failing to hide the eerie smirk on his face. "Hello, children." His voice was low, echoing in the room like a whisper on the wind. "Santa has come to bring you some joy." The children cheered, rushing to surround him, But as they got closer, some of the younger children instinctively backed away, sensing that something was off. A strange scent wafted from Santa, a sharp mixture of snow and metal. Standing in the back, Sarah felt her heart race, a chilling sensation spreading through her. When her eyes met Santa's, she noticed they weren't warm like she had imagined. They were hollow and lifeless. "You must be Sarah," he said, glancing at her with a faint, unsettling smile. "Why, yes, sir," she stammered. "I've heard a lot about you. A brave and clever little girl." His words held no warmth. "You know me?" Sarah asked, surprised. "I know all the children here." Santa's grin widened, sending another shiver down her spine. The celebration began, but the usual festive cheer seemed to be replaced by an underlying tension. Santa handed out gifts to each child, but whenever he touched them, they felt a strange, icy chill spread through their bodies. "This is for you," he said, handing Tommy a small box. "Thank you, sir," Tommy replied, though his eyes betrayed a hint of worry. When all the children had received their gifts, Santa stood in the middle of the room, his gaze sweeping over the small faces before him. "Remember to open your gifts when night falls. I have a special surprise for each of you." The children exchanged uncertain glances. Mrs. Miller stepped forward, trying to keep the atmosphere light. "Thank you for coming, sir. We're grateful for your kindness." "It was my pleasure," Santa replied, but his eyes didn't meet hers. Instead, they remained fixed on the children. After he left, the children gathered to open their gifts. Sarah carefully unwrapped her box to find a silver necklace, but when she touched it, a burning sensation shot through her hand. She pulled back, seeing a red mark on her skin. "What's wrong, Sarah?" Mary asked. "And nothing," Sarah replied, trying to hide her unease. Tommy opened his gift to find an old toy car with a broken wheel. "Look, it's missing a wheel," he said, disappointed. "My gift is broken too." Another child chimed in. A murmur spread among the children, disappointment and anxiety taking hold. Why would Santa give us gifts like these? Mary wondered aloud. Maybe he didn't have enough money to buy new ones, Sarah suggested, though even she didn't believe her own words. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sarah lay awake. The wind outside sounded like eerie whispers, carrying faint, incomprehensible words. She closed her eyes, but the hollow gaze of Santa's eyes kept resurfacing in her mind. Suddenly, she heard soft footsteps outside the hallway. The old wooden floor creaked with each step. Drawing closer to the dormitory, Sarah held her breath. Listening, the door creaked open, and a dark figure stood silently at the threshold. Moonlight seeped through, casting a tall shadow wearing a familiar red hat. "Santa," Sarah whispered, paralyzed with fear. The figure moved into the room, his eyes glowing with a strange light. "Sarah, Sarah," he called, his voice like a distant echo. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The children around her slept soundly, unaware of the danger looming over them. Santa moved to Tommy's bed, leaning down and whispering something. Tommy stirred, his face etched with fear even in his sleep. "No," Sarah managed to whisper, though her voice was barely audible. He turned to look at her, a wicked grin stretching across his face. "It's your turn, Sarah." She bolted upright, drenched in a cold sweat. Looking around, she realized she was still in bed, and the other children were sound asleep. "It was just a dream," she murmured, trying to calm herself, though the dread lingered. The next morning, Tommy didn't wake up as usual. Mrs. Miller tried calling his name, but he lay still. When she touched him, his skin was cold, his wide-open eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A piercing scream echoed through the orphanage, drawing everyone to the dormitory. "What happened?" a staff member asked, horrified. "Tommy, Sarah stammered, tears streaming down her face. A doctor was called, but no cause of death could be determined. Perhaps it was exhaustion, he speculated, though his eyes betrayed doubt. Fear and sorrow filled the orphanage. No one understood what was happening. Sarah remembered her dream from the night before, and guilt flooded her heart. Was there something I could have done to save him? She resolved to uncover the truth. But the more she searched, the deeper she fell into a maze of terror and mystery. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but it no longer seemed serene. Each snowflake felt like a silent warning of the darkness yet to come. After Tommy's sudden death, the atmosphere in the orphanage turned heavy and somber. The children's laughter and chatter faded, replaced by worried glances and fearful whispers that spread through the cold, dim hallways. Snow continued to fall outside, but it no longer brought peace. Instead, felt like a curtain hiding dark, unspeakable mysteries. Sarah sat by the window, staring out into the white, snow-covered courtyard. An inexplicable dread filled her heart. Tommy couldn't have just left like that, she thought. Something must have happened. As night fell and everyone drifted to sleep, Sarah remained wide awake, listening to the eerie whistling of the wind through the cracks in the windows. Suddenly, she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. The door creaked open, and a shadowy figure slipped past. "Mary," Sarah whispered, but no one responded. She decided to go out and investigate. The hallway was long and dark, lit only by the faint glow of oil lamps. Sarah moved slowly, her heart pounding. Suddenly, a strange, soft giggle echoed from the end of the hall. "Who's there?" she called, but only silence replied. As she got closer, Sarah saw Mary standing motionless in front of the storage room door, her wide, vacant eyes staring into the darkness. "Mary, what are you doing here?" Sarah placed a gentle hand on her friend's shoulder. Mary turned, but her eyes didn't seem to recognize her. "He's calling me," she murmured, her voice distant and hollow. "Who's calling you?" Sarah asked, worried. "Santa Claus. He wants us to come with him." Mary's faint smile sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "No, Mary, you're just dreaming. Let's go back to bed." Sarah tried to pull her friend away, but Mary jerked her arm back, her gaze turning fierce. "You don't understand. He's going to take us to a better place." Before Sarah could react, Mary opened the storage room door and walked into the darkness. The door slammed shut with an echo that reverberated down the hall. Sarah rushed to the door, trying to open it. "Mary, open the door," she cried. Hurried footsteps approached from behind her. Mrs. Miller and a few staff members arrived, their faces etched with concern. "What's going on, Sarah?" Mrs. Miller asked, her voice trembling. "Mary, she just went in there and won't come out," Sarah explained, tears welling up. One of the staff members used a key to open the storage room door. Inside, it was pitch black, with no sign of anyone. "There's no one here," he said, baffled. "That's impossible. She was just here," Sarah gasped, disbelief and fear taking over. Mrs. Miller placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're probably just under a lot of stress. Let's go back to bed." Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing. "I'm not imagining this," she muttered to herself. The next morning, Mary didn't wake up either. She lay motionless on her bed, her face pale and expressionless. Once again, doctors couldn't determine the cause. Panic spread through the orphanage. The children started sharing stories about strange dreams. They described seeing Santa Claus standing by their beds, beckoning them to follow him into the night. Some children even claimed to have followed him to dark, cold places. "He said he'd take us somewhere where there's no more suffering," one child whispered. The staff at the orphanage were equally perplexed and afraid. They tried reaching out to doctors and authorities, but with wartime shortages, help was limited. Determined to find answers, Mrs. Miller began looking into Santa Claus's identity. She sifted through letters and documents but found no information on who he was or where he had come from. Who was that man? She wondered aloud, feeling that she couldn't just stand by. Sarah decided to investigate on her own. She remembered the necklace Santa had given her and the strange burn mark it left on her hand. Maybe this gift is a clue, she thought. She went to the orphanage's small, dusty library, searching through old, forgotten books. One book, filled with local legends, caught her eye. The legend of Krampus, a demonic figure who appears on Christmas Eve to punish misbehaving children. She read silently. But we didn't do anything wrong. The more she read, the more the chilling descriptions seemed to match the Santa Claus they'd met. The worn clothes, the deep, dark eyes, and the twisted smile. Maybe he's not really Santa Claus, she whispered. Maybe he's something else. That night, Sarah decided to warn the other children. Don't go with him in your dreams. It's a trap, she urged them. But he promised to take us to a better place. One child argued, that's just a lie. Look, Tommy and Mary are gone forever. The children exchanged worried glances. Fear etched across their faces. As night descended, Sarah tried her best to stay awake, but sleep crept up on her, her eyelids growing heavy until she finally drifted off. In her dream, Sarah found herself in the middle of a dark forest. Strange, soft laughter surrounded her. Sarah, come with us. The voices of Tommy and Mary called out, but they sounded distant and distorted. Tommy? Mary? Where are you? She called out. A shadowy figure appeared before her. Santa Claus stood there, his eyes glowing with an eerie red light. Finally, you've come, he said in a voice that rumbled like thunder. What do you want from us? Sarah demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. I want to free you from this world of suffering. Come with me. No, you're not the real Santa Claus, she screamed. He laughed, the sound echoing through the forest. Clever, but it's too late. Sarah jolted awake, drenched in a cold sweat. She looked around the dormitory, only to notice that several beds were empty. This can't be happening, she thought. Panicked, she rushed out into the hallway, searching for her missing friends. The staff, now fully awake, were also in a state of alarm as they discovered more children were not waking up. What are we going to do? One staff member cried. Mrs. Miller looked hopeless. I don't know. I truly don't. Sarah decided to tell Mrs. Miller everything. There's something taking my friends. Mrs. Miller, I think it's the fake Santa Claus. Mrs. Miller looked at Sarah, a mix of confusion and fear in her eyes. Sarah, what are you talking about? I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. We have to stop him. Mrs. Miller sighed deeply. All right, we'll do it your way. They decided to collect all the gifts that Santa had given the children and lock them in a separate room, hoping this would prevent further harm. But that night, the number of affected children didn't decrease. Even some staff members began experiencing strange symptoms: insomnia, hallucinations, and panic attacks. Sarah realized that the situation was only worsening. We have to find him and put an end to this, she resolved. With Mrs. Miller, they went around town, asking about the strange Santa, but no one had any knowledge of his existence. We've never seen anyone like that, one local said. But there's a legend about an evil spirit that appears on Christmas Eve to steal the souls of the lonely. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. An evil spirit. When they returned to the orphanage, they knew time was running out. The number of remaining children was shrinking, and Sarah feared that she might be next. I'll confront him myself, she told Mrs. Miller. It's the only way. Mrs. Miller, filled with worry, protested. No, it's too dangerous. I can't let you do this. But if we do nothing, none of us will survive. Looking into Sarah's determined eyes, Mrs. Miller finally nodded. All right, but I'll stay by your side. Over the next 2 weeks, the orphanage sank into a state of horror. Each day, one more child failed to wake up from their sleep. There were no signs of illness, no obvious symptoms, just pale faces, little eyes staring blankly into the void. The air grew heavier with each passing day, and fear crept into every corner of the old building. Sarah felt as though she were living in a never-ending nightmare, watching her close friends leave one by one. She was haunted by their memories, but instead of letting fear take over, she decided to act. She knew something terribly wrong was happening, and she needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. One cold afternoon, Sarah went to the orphanage's dusty old library. The shelves were filled with ancient, worn books, many of them crumbling with age. She searched each shelf, hoping to find some clue about the mysterious Santa Claus. Finally, Sarah found a book bound in old leather titled Legends and Mysteries of Boston. She flipped through the pages, reading stories of lost spirits and dark entities hiding in the shadows. One chapter caught her attention, The Legend of the Dark Santa. According to the story, on bitterly cold winter nights, an entity in the guise of Santa Claus would appear in places where lonely children dwelled. He would promise joy and happiness, but in reality, he was there to steal the souls of children. Sarah's heart pounded. Maybe this is what's haunting us, she thought. She kept reading, hoping to find a way to stop the entity. According to the legend, the only way to confront the Dark Santa was to face him without fear and resist his deceptive promises. I'll stay up all night and wait for him, Sarah resolved. That night, once all the children were asleep, Sarah sat by the window, watching the dark night sky. The wind howled through the barren branches outside, creating eerie sounds. Time passed slowly, but she refused to close her eyes. Close to midnight, a soft sound echoed from the hallway. Sarah listened carefully. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, grew nearer. The door creaked open, and a familiar figure appeared in the dim light. Santa Claus stood there, his worn suit covered in snowy dust. His eyes glowed strangely, a faint smile on his face. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice echoing as if from a distant place. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Who are you? Why are you hurting my friends?" He chuckled softly. "I'm only here to help. I bring them eternal joy, freeing them from this world of pain." "That's not help. You're taking their lives," Sarah protested, her eyes filled with determination. "You don't understand, Sarah. Here, we are alone, forgotten. I only want to bring happiness to you all." "No, we don't need that. Leave us alone." She stood up, facing him, even as fear pulsed through her. Santa stepped closer, his gaze turning colder. "You're brave, but resisting me is useless. Come with me, and you'll no longer suffer." Sarah took a step back but stood her ground. "You can't force me. I know who you are. You're just a dark spirit, feeding on our loneliness." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Oh, so you've done some research on me? But that doesn't change anything. You're wrong. I'm not afraid of you, and I will stop you." Sarah's voice grew stronger. Santa paused, his smile fading. "You think you can defeat me? I believe in friendship and hope. Those are things you can't take away." At that moment, a soft light began to fill the room. The children's photographs on the wall seemed to glow, as if they were standing beside Sarah, supporting her. Santa furrowed his brow, seemingly affected by the light. What is happening?" Sarah realized that faith and love might be the key to driving him away. "See, we're not alone. We have each other." He took a step back, fury flashing in his eyes. "No, this can't be." The light grew brighter, dissolving the darkness around him. Santa let out a scream of pain. "You'll regret this." And in a swirl of dark smoke, he vanished, leaving the room silent once more. Sarah exhaled in relief, but she knew it wasn't over yet. She rushed to each bed, checking on her friends. All of them were still asleep, breathing peacefully. "I did it," she thought, her heart swelling with gratitude. The next morning, the children woke up with refreshed faces. It was as if a weight had been lifted. Mrs. Miller was astonished to see them happy again. "What did you do, Sarah?" she asked. I just faced my fears and believed in the strength of friendship, Sarah replied with a smile. But deep down, Sarah knew that the entity might return one day. She vowed to stay vigilant and protect her friends. After her terrifying encounter with the dark entity, Sarah believed that everything had finally ended. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant blue, and warm sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a gentle glow on the snow-covered ground. The children awoke with smiles on their faces, as if a long nightmare had passed. Mrs. Miller felt relieved, hoping the orphanage could return to peace. "You did it, Sarah," Mrs. Miller said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved us." Sarah gave a quiet smile. "I just did what needed to be done." Yet, deep down, an unease lingered within her. She couldn't forget the look of anger in Santa's eyes before he disappeared. Is he really gone forever? She wondered. The days that followed were filled with a rare calm. The children resumed their daily routines, studying, playing, and helping each other. Laughter once again filled the halls, pushing away the winter's chill. One evening, as Sarah sat reading by the fireplace, she heard light footsteps approaching. She looked up to see a boy standing before her. He had deep blue eyes, blonde hair, and wore simple but clean clothes. "Hello, I'm Daniel." He introduced himself with a friendly smile. "Hello, Daniel. Are you new here?" she asked. "Yes, I just arrived today. I've heard you're very brave," he said, his eyes sparkling. Sarah sensed something unusual about him but couldn't pinpoint it. "I just did my best to help everyone. Tell me about what happened," Daniel urged. Sarah hesitated but then shared the story of the mysterious Santa and her ordeal. Daniel listened intently, nodding now and then. "That's strange," he said once she finished. "Weren't you afraid?" "Of course, but I couldn't let fear control me," Sarah replied. Daniel smiled. "You're special, Sarah." That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she found herself thinking about Daniel. Who is he? Why does he feel so familiar? She wondered before drifting into sleep. In her dream, Sarah found herself in a vast field of flowers. In the distance, Daniel was waving at her. "Come over here, Sarah," he called with a bright smile. She ran toward him, but the distance between them never seemed to close. Suddenly, the sky darkened, storm clouds rolled in, and Daniel vanished. In his place, Santa appeared with blazing eyes. "You think you can escape me?" His voice boomed like thunder. Sarah awoke with a start, cold sweat covering her brow. "It was just a dream," she whispered, trying to calm her racing heart. The next morning, she searched everywhere for Daniel but couldn't find him. "Has anyone seen Daniel?" she asked the other children. "Daniel who?" One of them replied. "There's no one here named Daniel." Sarah was shocked. "That's impossible. He said he arrived yesterday." Mrs. Miller approached her. "Sarah, there's no one named Daniel on our records." A chill spread through her as she realized something was very wrong. Who was he? That night, Sarah decided to stay awake once more. Sitting by the window, she stared into the darkened yard. Suddenly, she saw a figure standing beneath the old tree. In the pale moonlight, she recognized Daniel's face. He looked up at her, but his eyes turned a deep, glowing red. "Come down to me, Sarah." A voice echoed in her mind. She backed away in fear. "You're not Daniel." A low, eerie laugh filled the room. Daniel's figure morphed into the terrifying form of Santa. "I told you, you can't escape me." Sarah felt a wave of despair. "What do you want from me?" "I want your soul, just like the others. You're special, and I need your strength." "No, I won't let you harm anyone else," she shouted. Santa raised his hand, summoning a powerful wind that shattered the window, sending shards of glass flying across the room. Sarah fell to the ground, wincing in pain. "You don't have a choice," he said, advancing with a sinister smile. In that moment of despair, Sarah remembered a line from the book she had read. "The greatest power against darkness is hope and love." She stood up and looked him straight in the eyes. "You can't take what doesn't belong to you. Our love and hope are stronger than you." A warm light suddenly emanated from her, illuminating the entire room. Santa howled in pain, retreating. "No, this isn't possible." The light grew brighter, dissolving the darkness around him. But this time, rather than disappearing, he smiled coldly. "You've chosen the harder path. I will return, and when I do, nothing will save you." Then, he vanished into the air, leaving the room empty and silent. The next morning, the children found Sarah lying motionless in her bed. Her face was peaceful, but she no longer breathed. Mrs. Miller held her close, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, you've done more than enough." News of Sarah's passing spread quickly. The orphanage could not continue after the series of tragedies. Authorities decided to close it, leaving a lonely house on the snow-covered field. Locals began to speak of the horrifying story. The legend of the mysterious Santa and the missing children became a haunting tale passed down for generations. No one truly knew the figure's identity, nor did anyone dare approach the abandoned orphanage. Years later, people walking past the empty building reported seeing the figure of a young girl standing by the window, gazing out with a sorrowful expression. Others claimed that on Christmas Eve, they could hear laughter and the sound of children's footsteps coming from the house, as though the children had never left. The questions remain unanswered. Will Sarah and the other children ever find peace? Who was that Santa? A dark entity or simply a manifestation of fear and loneliness? The legend lives on, and each winter, as the snow begins to fall, people share the story of the Boston orphanage and the mysterious Santa, a reminder of the mysteries still unsolved, and the enduring power of love and hope in the face of darkness. Story number 2. Christmas Eve Massacre in Covina, California, 2008. Christmas Eve, 2008, Covina, California, in the warm Ortega family home. Twinkling lights adorned the Christmas tree, and the aroma of traditional holiday dishes filled the air. Family and friends gathered, laughing, reminiscing about the past year, and enjoying the sacred reunion of Christmas Eve. For them, this was the most precious time of the year, a moment to set aside worries and devote themselves entirely to each other. Sylvia, the Ortega family's daughter, smiled gently as she watched her loved ones enjoying the night together. She had divorced Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, a marriage that ended in heartbreak and abuse, but Sylvia felt she had finally stepped out of that dark chapter. She thought it was all behind her now, that she could spend this Christmas in true peace and happiness, free from the anxieties of her past. Laughter echoed throughout the living room. The children gleefully opened small gifts under the tree, while the adults clinked glasses, exchanging well wishes. Christmas Eve was a sacred night, filled with warmth and tranquility. No one could imagine that anything terrible could disrupt such a joyful atmosphere. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. A child, thinking it might be a surprise gift arriving late, ran to answer it. As the door opened, the room fell silent for a brief moment. Standing outside was a man dressed as Santa Claus. His face held a seemingly friendly expression, with a slight smile, but there was something in his eyes that made the adults in the room uneasy. The child exclaimed, "Santa Claus!" and ran toward him, delighted, believing this was part of the celebration. The man stepped inside, still holding that strange smile. In his hand, he carried a large red bag, which everyone assumed was filled with gifts for the kids. But the bag held no presents. In the warm golden glow of Christmas lights, his cold eyes flashed with a deadly gleam, and his grip on the bag tightened. From a distance, Sylvia felt a chill down her spine as she recognized the man. It was Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, her ex-husband. He had come to this house on Christmas Eve, a night Sylvia and her family had thought would be filled with happiness. She couldn't move, frozen as his eyes passed over her, a haunting reminder of the dark past she had thought she'd buried. Bruce stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. No one in that room knew they stood on the brink of a nightmare. Bruce, dressed as Santa Claus, quietly surveyed the house, his gaze filled with bitterness and chilling indifference. Christmas, the night of peace and hope, was now nothing more than a fragile veil hiding a horrifying reality about to unfold. And it all began with the image of a fake Santa Claus, carrying not gifts, but death. The room was still immersed in the festive atmosphere, filled with laughter and the joyful sounds of children. As Santa Claus made his way inside, Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, dressed as Santa, walked with heavy steps, his eyes blazing with brutality. He scanned the room, looking at the people who were once his family. Now, in his eyes, they were no longer loved ones, but targets for his revenge. Suddenly, Bruce reached into the large red bag everyone assumed was full of gifts. Instead, he pulled out a gun, and the fake friendly smile disappeared, replaced by a cold, ruthless glare. No one had time to react, and within seconds, gunshots echoed throughout the room. Chaos erupted. The adults cried out, trying to shield the children from Bruce's line of sight. Screams filled the room as everyone tried to escape the wrath of the maniac in a Santa suit. Bruce, his face emotionless, advanced and shot at anyone in his path. Each bullet marked the end of a family member. As they fell one by one, blood spilling across the floor strewn with Christmas gifts and decorations. Sylvia, the only one who recognized Bruce from the start, desperately tried to lead her family members to safety, but the chaos made it impossible for anyone to coordinate. She watched in horror as her loved ones fell around her, her eyes wide with terror. Her young niece, too innocent to understand, clutched her teddy bear tightly, her gaze confused as she saw Santa Claus, the very symbol of joy, become the source of this nightmare. But Bruce didn't stop there. He continued, each bullet mercilessly finding a family member, ignoring the screams and desperate pleas. To him, everyone in that room was an enemy. With each step he took, he crushed any hope the Ortega family had, as loved ones succumbed to his unrelenting brutality. When the gun ran out of bullets, Bruce slowly set it down, but he wasn't finished yet. Reaching into the large red bag, he pulled out a homemade device, a flamethrower. Those who had survived stood frozen, unable to believe their eyes. Before them, Santa Claus was about to turn Christmas Eve into a living hell, transforming the Ortega family's home into a sea of fire. The flames were poised to consume everything. Bruce activated the device, sending a torrent of fire across the room, burning everything in its path. The intense flames engulfed every corner of the house, the walls, Christmas decorations, the twinkling tree. Everything was reduced to ashes in moments. There was no more laughter, no more Christmas music, only the roar of flames, the agonized screams, and the suffocating stench of burning objects, filling the air with choking smoke. The survivors in the house desperately tried to escape, but every exit was surrounded by flames. The house had transformed into a massive inferno, a nightmarish furnace. Their cries for help were swallowed by the thick, black smoke, and in their panic, some could do nothing but hold each other, resigned to their fate in the embrace of the fire. Outside, the blaze illuminated the neighborhood, lighting up the night sky. Neighbors, drawn by the screams and explosions, rushed out to witness the horrifying sight. They saw a house engulfed in flames, the red glow of the fire casting an eerie light on this Christmas night. A terrible warning from the darkness that peace had been shattered by a man dressed as Santa. Bruce stood amidst the blazing inferno, observing the results of his carnage with a chilling calmness. As the house began to collapse, he silently walked away, not looking back. He vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a home reduced to ashes and those who lay dead in the wake of his rage. The flames from the Ortega house roared fiercely, reaching up to the tree branches above, casting a red glow across the Covina neighborhood. Neighbors, who initially thought it was simply a joyful Christmas party, now rushed outside. They witnessed a horrific scene, a house engulfed in a massive fire, and from within, faint cries for help echoed. lost in the thick haze of black smoke. Some frantically dialed 911, while others stood helplessly, unable to believe that just minutes ago, that home was filled with laughter and joy. Inside the house, those who had survived the initial attack were desperately trying to escape the raging firestorm. Sparks shot across the room, igniting curtains, Christmas decorations, and gifts under the tree, all turning into fresh sources of flames that fed the inferno. A few survivors made it to the windows, attempting to break the glass to escape. The sound of shattering glass mixed with the crackling of furniture and the roar of the flames, creating a chaotic and harrowing scene. The children, not fully understanding the horror of the situation, clung to the adults, their terrified eyes reflecting the fiery devastation surrounding them. In the thick smoke and terror-filled atmosphere, one survivor saw Sylvia. She was desperately trying to pull a family member away from the flames. Her eyes were filled with tears, the joy of Christmas completely erased. She sobbed and prayed, clinging to a last hope, but the flames showed no mercy. Outside, the neighbors stood at a distance, horrified, unable to do anything. They watched as the house collapsed, with thick black columns of smoke rising and the red glow of the flames lighting up the night sky, as if Christmas itself had been cursed. The twinkling lights on the surrounding homes seemed silent before this heartbreaking scene. In that eerie silence, a woman burst into tears when she saw a Santa suit discarded on the roadside, left behind by Bruce after he fled the house. The suit was now covered in smoke and ash, a haunting symbol of an unimaginable crime. She shuddered, realizing that the man who should have embodied joy and peace had been the one to destroy a family's happiness on the most sacred night. Police and firefighters eventually arrived, but they could only confront the wreckage left behind. Helpless in the face of the horrific destruction Bruce had caused, they worked to put out the flames, trying to salvage whatever remained, but their hearts grew heavy as they encountered motionless bodies, lifeless faces, each one a source of joy, hope, and love for someone on Christmas Eve. The townspeople gathered, heads bowed in sorrow and fear. They knew that tonight was no longer a night of joy, but one of haunting sorrow that would never fade. The image of the blazing Ortega house and the ash-covered Santa suit would forever be tied to this horrifying memory. A reminder that peace can be taken away in an instant, and that sometimes what we trust most can become the source of unimaginable terror. When the last flames were finally extinguished, the Ortega family home was reduced to a pile of ashes and charred walls. The desolation left anyone who witnessed it speechless. Embers still glowed on the ground, and the smell of burning lingered in the Christmas night air, like a scar that would forever remind them of an unforgettable tragedy. In the days that followed, news of the Christmas Eve massacre in Covina spread across the U.S. News broadcasts, newspapers, and social media all reported on the killer Santa, who had dressed in the very symbol of joy and peace to bring unimaginable brutality. Images of the burned-out house and scattered gifts became symbols of a horrifying night. And from that moment on, Christmas Eve in Covina would never again be a peaceful night. The Ortega family's neighbors could not shake the sounds of the screams and the sight of the blazing house from that quiet night. They felt a sense of guilt for not being able to do anything, though they knew there was nothing they could have done. A heavy silence settled over the entire neighborhood, as if the entire community had been shattered by Bruce's actions. Fear and distrust crept into everyday life, and many families began to regard those around them with caution, unsure of who could be trusted and who might be dangerous. The police found Bruce Jeffrey Pardo's body in a nearby hotel room. He had taken his own life, leaving law enforcement and the public with countless unanswered questions. There was no suicide note, no explanation. The reasons behind his horrific actions remained forever shrouded in darkness, leaving only a shadow of hatred and madness with no end. The town of Covina had lost its sense of peace. Christmas Eve, a holiday everyone looked forward to all year, was now a haunting memory, a night no one wanted to remember yet couldn't forget. Many families began to avoid hosting large gatherings on Christmas Eve, keeping their loved ones close to avoid any unexpected situations. The children in the neighborhood, who once eagerly awaited Santa's visit, now felt a chill at the very thought of him. Bruce's Santa suit in the tragedy had turned a symbol of joy into the embodiment of horror. Each year, as Christmas approached, those who had witnessed the tragedy in Covina would remember that dark night, a haunting memory of the loved ones who had been lost. Many still couldn't sleep when Christmas came, as visions of the burning house and the screams of the Ortega family echoed in their minds. Families in town held small memorials, laying flowers and lighting candles at the site where the Ortega home once stood, in memory of the innocent souls who had been taken by such cruelty. The tragedy of that Christmas Eve forever changed Covina. The fear that anyone could become a hidden killer, that even someone once trusted could turn into a nightmare, left everyone in a state of constant vigilance. For the surviving members of the Ortega family, nothing could replace their overwhelming loss. They lived with a persistent pain, the pain of a night that took everything, leaving them only with emptiness and heartbreaking memories. Christmas Eve in Covina would never be a peaceful night again. The brightly lit Christmas lights on every house couldn't banish the shadow of that fateful night. The story of the killer Santa became a dark legend retold every Christmas, a reminder that darkness sometimes hides within the most beautiful symbols, and that sometimes those we once loved can bring the deepest pain. Story number 3. Killer Santa in Texas, 1929. Christmas Eve, 1929. In the outskirts of Texas, the small home of Anna's family was aglow with lights, twinkling over the Christmas tree, with brightly wrapped presents neatly arranged beneath. Inside, laughter filled the living room, blending with the sounds of Christmas carols, creating a warm, loving atmosphere. Anna and her family gathered close, awaiting the most joyous moment of the year. Anna looked around, her heart full of happiness at the sight of her loved ones all there. All she wanted was a peaceful night with her family, to forget about worries, sadness, and everything she had left behind, especially the painful breakup with Joseph D. Cooper. The tense and violent end of her relationship with Joseph had left her deeply hurt, but now she felt she could put it aside and enjoy Christmas Eve. Meanwhile, outside the house, Joseph stood in the shadows, hidden behind the trees, peering inside through the window, dressed in a Santa Claus suit. His eyes held a chilling coldness. Joseph had never accepted Anna leaving him, and since then, a smoldering fire of resentment had grown within him, turning into something fierce. Tonight, he hadn't come to deliver gifts but to exact his revenge. As the clock struck 9 p.m., Joseph approached the front door. He rang the bell, and the sound caused the lively atmosphere inside to pause for a moment. A child in the house excitedly ran to the door, their eyes lighting up at the sight of Santa Claus standing outside. The adults, thinking it was a fun surprise for the children, warmly welcomed him inside. Joseph entered the house, and the Christmas lights illuminated his face. His cold, emotionless gaze swept across the smiling faces, eventually locking onto Anna, the woman he once loved but now viewed as the target of his hatred. Anna froze as she recognized his gaze, feeling a chill run through her as a sense of unease settled over her. The room suddenly fell silent as everyone sensed the unsettling presence of the man who had just entered. Some exchanged puzzled glances, but no one said a word. The children, unaware, cheered and ran towards Santa Claus with innocent excitement. However, no one in that room knew that the man before them was not Santa, but rather the embodiment of darkness and vengeance. Joseph slowly stepped into the center of the living room, his hands gripping the red sack. No one in the room could have imagined what he had prepared in that bag. In the suffocating stillness, he smiled a cold, unfeeling smile devoid of any Christmas joy. Everything he brought tonight wasn't peace, but an absolute nightmare. The atmosphere in the living room grew strangely tense as Santa Claus stepped into the center of the room. The laughter and chatter faded as everyone sensed that something was off, though they couldn't quite place it. Anna stared at Joseph, her heart pounding, instinctively sensing that something terrible was about to happen. She wanted to reach out and pull the children away from him, but her legs felt frozen, unable to move. Suddenly, Joseph reached into the red bag he was carrying. Everyone still thought he was about to pull out Christmas gifts for the children, but instead, he drew out a gun, cold and gleaming under the Christmas lights. Panicked scream erupted in the room, and in an instant, joy and laughter were replaced by fear and chaos. Without hesitation, Joseph opened fire. The gunshots shattered the peaceful atmosphere, drowning out every voice and cry. The first to fall was a man in the family, struck down in a moment of pure horror for those around him. Joseph, his expression cold and unfeeling, continued shooting at those in the room, each bullet fired with deadly precision. The children, who had innocently believed this was the real Santa, now cried in terror, clinging to the adults. Their cries filled the room, mingling with the frantic screams of the adults. Family members scrambled, desperately trying to escape the nightmare that had taken over their home. But Joseph had blocked every escape route. He moved slowly, almost savoring each moment of terror he had long awaited to unleash. In a state of panic, Anna held tightly to one of the children, trying to find a way to get them out of the house. But Joseph's eyes followed her. For a brief moment, their eyes met, her gaze full of fear met his, cold and unfeeling. Anna knew then that she and her family would not escape Joseph's wrath tonight. He stepped closer to Anna, wearing a sinister, mocking smile. Her legs trembled, too weak to carry her away. In a low, hate-filled voice, Joseph whispered, "Is this the Christmas gift you thought I deserved?" Then he raised the gun, ready to end Anna's life. In that moment, all Anna could do was close her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of firing, Joseph slowly lowered his hand, surveying the room where Anna's family members lay fallen, blood staining the floor. He turned to the children, trembling and hiding behind the surviving adults, his gaze empty and merciless. The family members tried to shield the children, but none were brave enough to confront him. The room now resembled an arena, with Joseph as the sole figure of control, consumed by a blazing fury and hatred. Joseph then approached the table laden with food and the Christmas tree, with its twinkling lights and vibrant decorations. The gifts under the tree no longer symbolized joy, but stood as silent witnesses to a bloody night. With vicious anger, Joseph knocked everything over, turning the room into a scene of utter chaos and ruin. Joseph stood amidst the wreckage of the living room, with faintly flickering Christmas lights reflecting off the blood-stained floor. The gunfire had stopped, but the air still hung heavy with the smell of gunpowder and death. The cruelty and madness in his eyes sent shivers down the spines of the remaining survivors, their eyes wide with terror as they realized he was far from finished. Joseph slowly approached the Christmas tree, where the untouched gifts lay, now without anyone eagerly awaiting them. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a gleaming knife. He lifted it, and the twinkling lights illuminated his face. Cold and devoid of emotion, the survivors, paralyzed with fear, could only watch him, too scared to move, praying that his fury would not turn on them. For a moment, his empty gaze landed on Anna, his eyes cold and bottomless. "Did you think you could escape me?" Joseph whispered, his voice low and chilling, like an echo from the abyss. His words were drenched in hatred, leaving Anna speechless, her legs shaking as she faced the man she once loved. Now transformed into a true monster, Joseph moved closer, gripping the knife tightly, but suddenly he paused. He looked around, seemingly satisfied with the chaos he had created. The shattered decorations, the scattered gifts, once symbols of light, had lost their glow. He lowered the knife not out of mercy, but because he was preparing for the final, brutal climax of his vengeance. With slow, heavy steps, Joseph walked toward the living room wall, where a blank space remained. He knelt down, dipped his hand in the pooling blood at his feet, and began writing on the wall in letters as red as blood, "Your Christmas is over." Each stroke appeared cold and menacing, leaving a permanent mark of horror on this night. When he finished, Joseph turned to leave, not sparing a single backward glance. Before stepping outside, he looked one last time at the devastation he had caused. As if to seal the memory, a twisted satisfaction glinted in his eyes. He had left his final mark, a grim curse on a night that was meant to be peaceful and hopeful. The door closed behind him, and Joseph vanished into the night like a ghost, leaving the nightmare behind. Inside the house, the bloody message on the wall, the stains, and the fallen were silent witnesses to an unspeakable act of cruelty. The next morning, as the sun rose, a pall of grief hung over Anna's family home. The neighbors, who could never have imagined that Christmas Eve would end in tragedy, gathered in shock. The police arrived at the scene, each officer stepping into the house with somber expressions. Before them lay an unbelievable sight, a Christmas Eve devastated by the hatred of a man disguised as Santa Claus. The twinkling Christmas lights now only heightened the sadness of the ruined room, where gifts lay scattered across a blood-stained floor. The investigators looked up at the wall, where the bloody message, "Your Christmas is over," remained, an indelible curse. They exchanged silent glances, as if they, too, were facing the shadow that had cast itself over the house. The people of Texas were left in disbelief as news of the massacre spread. In a single night, the symbol of joy and peace, Santa Claus, had transformed into the embodiment of horror. The children in the neighborhood, once excited to see Santa on Christmas Eve, now shivered at the thought. Many families began locking their doors early, reluctant to welcome anyone. Even on Christmas, public outrage grew, and the story of the killer Santa spread across the country, becoming one of the most chilling tales in American crime history. Newspapers published images of the ruined home, the blood-stained wall, and the haunting message left by Joseph. The quiet Texas town was consumed by a fear that anyone might be hiding in unimaginable darkness. For those who witnessed the tragedy, Christmas was no longer a sacred holiday but a dark reminder of the cruelty humans are capable of. Anna, who survived, carried with her a wound that nothing could heal. Every year, as Christmas approached, she relived the horrifying memories, Joseph's cold eyes, the screams, and the eerie message on the wall. She could never forget that night and lived with a persistent fear, haunted by the memories of a bloody Christmas Eve. From that point on, the town of Texas no longer held large Christmas celebrations. Families marked the holiday in small, private gatherings, more cautious and wary. Those who knew Joseph D. Cooper's story often retold it on Christmas Eve as a warning, a reminder that darkness can hide within even the most innocent of symbols. The image of Santa Claus, once a symbol of joy and hope, had turned into an unshakable nightmare that no one could erase. Christmas Eve kidnapping in Georgia, 1997. On Christmas Eve in 1997, the small town of Lakewood, Georgia, was filled with the warm and bustling atmosphere of the holiday season. The city's largest shopping center, Holiday Plaza, was lavishly decorated with hundreds of twinkling lights. A gigantic Christmas tree was adorned with artificial snowflakes and vibrant ornaments. Laughter, chatter, and Christmas music echoed everywhere, creating a space full of joy and happiness. Meanwhile, the Thompson family was preparing for a special evening. Lily Thompson, an innocent 7-year-old girl who adored Santa Claus, was eagerly helping her mother decorate a small Christmas tree in the living room. Her eyes sparkled as she looked at the ornaments, string lights, and meticulously chosen decorations her mother had picked out. Lily's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were also busily preparing traditional dishes for the Christmas feast. Lily ran to the window, looking out at the bustling shopping center. She jumped up and down, watching other children also waiting for Santa Claus to appear. "Mommy, Mommy, when will Santa Claus arrive?" Lily asked with a bright smile. Mrs. Thompson smiled, brushing her long hair back. Santa will come unexpectedly, dear. You just need to be patient and always listen for the sound of his bells. Meanwhile, a mysterious man in a Santa Claus suit was standing quietly in a corner of the shopping center. He was John Michaels, a man in his early 40s, tall with graying brown hair and deep-set eyes that didn't exude friendliness. John frequently appeared at Holiday Plaza every Christmas season, but no one really knew who he was or what his purpose was. He wore a vibrant Santa Claus suit, his face hidden by a hat and thick fake beard, but his eyes always reflected a cold and mysterious look. The children in the shopping center had no idea that the man standing in the corner was not an ordinary Santa Claus. He often stood still, not interacting much with customers, merely silently observing their every move with a piercing gaze. Some of the shopping center staff also began to feel that something was off when they saw John Michaels appear, but they didn't dare to speak up, worried about the truth behind this Santa Claus costume. As evening approached, the shopping center became quieter. Stores began to close, leaving only a few final cleaning staff. Lily and her family were working hard to finish decorating, the twinkling lights reflecting on their joyful faces. However, this warm atmosphere was gradually replaced by heavy silence, with only the soft murmurs of Christmas carols remaining. While Lily was holding her mother's hand to place the last ornament on the tree, she felt a cold gaze fixed upon her. Turning around, she saw John Michaels standing not far away, his eyes not leaving her. Lily frowned, a shiver enveloping her. Mrs. Thompson noticed her daughter's gaze and looked in the direction Lily was staring, feeling an unnamed anxiety. "Is something wrong, dear?" she asked, but Lily just shook her head, trying not to reveal the fear in her eyes. At that moment, the doorbell rang loudly, signaling that a special customer had arrived to receive a gift from Santa Claus. The child ran to open the door, joyfully shouting upon seeing Santa enter. John Michaels quietly stood up and moved to the corner of the shopping center, silently standing near the Christmas tree, where all eyes turned toward him. Lily and Emily, Lily's friend, ran over to receive gifts from Santa like the other children. However, when Emily approached, Lily saw John Michaels' gaze linger on her in a strange way, causing Lily to feel uneasy. "Merry Christmas, Emily," John Michaels said in a warm but eerie voice. Emily eagerly received the gift from his hand, but Lily couldn't take her eyes off John's cold stare. He stood silently for a moment before turning away, quietly leaving the shopping center without leaving any trace. His figure disappeared into the dark night, but the fear remained in the hearts of Lily and Emily. As the children ran back to their families, Lily felt her heart beating faster. Mrs. Thompson noticed the change in the faces of the two girls, feeling worried without knowing why. "Is something wrong, Lily?" she asked. But Lily just held her mother's hand tightly and looked back toward the shopping center, where John Michaels had vanished. The shopping center continued to shine with Christmas lights, but Lily and Emily couldn't forget the piercing gaze of the mysterious Santa Claus. They didn't know that this year's Christmas Eve would become a never-ending nightmare, as the darkness of the man in the Santa suit began to haunt everyone in this small town. After the bustling Christmas evening, as the Lakewood shopping center began to quiet down, Lily and Emily stayed behind to finish the last of the decorations. The Christmas lights still twinkled, creating a cozy and magical atmosphere. However, the images of the mysterious Santa Claus they had encountered earlier continued to echo in Lily's mind. She tried to forget her fears, but the strange presence of that man wouldn't let her find peace. As Lily was carefully adjusting an ornament on the Christmas tree, she felt an unusual chill run down her spine. She turned around and saw the mysterious Santa Claus standing not far from them, his eyes never leaving the two girls. He stood silently, not participating in any other activities, simply observing them with a penetrating and cold gaze. Emily, noticing Santa's presence, quietly pulled Lily closer. "Lily, what should we do? He's just standing there like that." Emily didn't have time to finish her question before Santa moved closer. "We need to focus on our work, Emily." Lily tried to stay calm, but her heart was still pounding in her chest. But Santa didn't go away. He continued to stand there, his cold eyes staring straight at the two girls, occasionally giving a strange smile without any other reaction. As evening wore on, Santa's presence became even more suspicious. He began appearing during the least crowded times, especially when the shopping center was about to close. One afternoon, while Lily and Emily were working, an older employee named Mrs. Margaret approached them with a worried expression. "Girls, have you noticed that strange Santa? I've seen him wandering around this area in the evenings," Mrs. Margaret said, her voice low and full of concern. Lily and Emily exchanged astonished glances. "Ma'am, we've seen him too. He's really different from the other Santas," Emily replied, her voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Margaret nodded, looking in the direction she was speaking about. "Yes, he's always standing quietly in dark corners, not participating in any activities. I feel something isn't right with him. We should be more cautious, especially when working late during the holidays." Mrs. Margaret's warnings only heightened the fear in Lily and Emily's hearts. They began to feel that the mysterious Santa was not just an ordinary volunteer employee. He seemed to have some purpose, something that couldn't be explained. When the shopping center began closing each evening, Santa's presence became even more apparent. He always appeared when the center was emptying out, standing silently near the entrance as if waiting for someone. Lily and Emily couldn't ignore these signs, but they didn't dare speak up amid the indifference of those around them. One night, as Lily and Emily were doing the final cleanup before leaving, they sensed that something was wrong. The lights near the decoration area started flickering randomly, and the sounds from the Christmas carols seemed distorted. They looked around, trying to find the cause of these incidents, but saw nothing but the emptiness of the shopping center. Suddenly, they heard light footsteps behind them. Lily turned around and saw the mysterious Santa standing not far away, his eyes still fixed on them. He moved closer, walking slowly and stopping right in front of them. "Tonight, I will bring you a real miracle," Santa said, his voice warm but full of implication. "Something you've never imagined." Emily felt herself trembling and wanted to pull Lily away, but she felt as if an invisible force was holding them in place. "We should go, Lily," Emily whispered, trying to control the fear within her. But Santa only gave a mocking smile and quietly stepped back. Standing silently nearby, he disappeared quickly into the darkness, leaving the two girls in a state of horror and helplessness. When the shopping center closed, Lily and Emily quickly left, but the fear still lingered in their minds. They did not know that this year's Christmas Eve would become a nightmare none of them could forget. On Christmas Eve in 1997, the Holiday Plaza Shopping Center in Lakewood, Georgia, was more bustling than ever. The twinkling lights were dazzling, and Christmas music echoed everywhere, creating a warm and exhilarating festive atmosphere. 7-year-old Lily Thompson, an innocent little girl, was enjoying this cheerful ambience with her family. She gazed at the large Christmas tree right in the center, her eyes sparkling with eagerness as she awaited gifts from Santa Claus. Lily's family included her parents and her younger sister Emily, all immersed in the joy of the holiday season. Her father, Michael Thompson, was busy preparing traditional dishes, while her mother, Margaret Thompson, carefully decorated small, lovely ornaments around the Christmas tree. Emily sat by the window, eagerly watching other children who were also hoping for a visit from Santa, while everyone was engrossed in their happiness. The silent figure of the mysterious Santa Claus, John Michaels, appeared in a corner of the shopping center hallway. He was a tall man in his 40s, with graying brown hair and deep-set eyes that did not exude friendliness. John frequently appeared during Christmas, but no one knew who he really was or what his purpose was. He stood silently, observing everyone with a piercing gaze and a strange smile, making the atmosphere more eerie than ever. Tonight, the shopping center was ready to close, the stores began packing up, and the laughter and chatter gradually faded away. Lily and her family were preparing to leave after a day of festivities. But before stepping out, Lily felt a cold gaze upon her. She turned around and saw John Michaels standing near the Christmas tree, his eyes never leaving her. His smile remained unchanged, cold and full of hidden meaning. "Lily, we should go," her father said, noticing the unease in his daughter's eyes. But Lily couldn't move. She just stared at John Michaels with unspeakable fear. John moved closer, each step slow and heavy. "Merry Christmas, Lily," he whispered, his voice warm but threatening. "Tonight, I will bring you a real miracle." Before Lily and her family could react, John Michaels quickly approached and grabbed Lily's hand forcefully. She felt a chill run down her spine, unable to explain the overwhelming fear in her heart. Lily's parents tried to pull her away from him, but John did not relent. He held her hand tightly, his eyes fixed on her as if unwilling to let go. "Don't make me let go," John Michaels said, his voice turning cold and firm. "This Christmas will be a night of miracles, and you will witness it." In panic, Lily tried to pull her hand away, but John's strong grip prevented her from escaping. He pushed her into the large Christmas tree, where the twinkling lights created a strange and dark scene. Her parents tried to intervene, but they couldn't stop his brutality. In an instant, the whole family was plunged into a nightmare with no escape. Lily felt herself being pulled deep into darkness, the sounds of Christmas music echoing distantly. He approached her, his eyes showing no remorse or fear. "Come with me, Lily," he said, his voice smoldering and authoritative. "I will take you to a place you've never seen." Before Lily could react, John Michaels forcefully pushed her through the dark corridors of the shopping center. The image of him in a Santa suit advancing through the deserted space made Lily feel as if she were lost in another world, a place without the light and warmth of Christmas, only the cold emptiness of darkness. Meanwhile, Lily's parents frantically tried to protect their daughter, but no one could stop him. John Michaels quietly left the shopping center, leaving Lily's family in a state of confusion and horror. The doorbell rang softly, but no one saw anything except the silhouette of the mysterious Santa Claus who had vanished with Lily. The next morning, when the shopping center reopened, the staff discovered that Lily had disappeared without a trace. Searches were immediately conducted, but no clues led to her whereabouts. The image of a mysterious Santa Claus in a bright red suit standing silently in the shopping center became a symbol of unending fear. After Lily Thompson mysteriously disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1997, the Holiday Plaza shopping center in Lakewood, Georgia, quickly plunged into chaos and confusion. The decorative lights continued to twinkle, but the cheerful and happy atmosphere had completely vanished, replaced by a heavy silence and an unnamed fear. News of Lily's abduction spread rapidly throughout Lakewood. The townspeople couldn't believe their ears when they heard that a 7-year-old girl had vanished right outside her home at the hands of a mysterious man in a Santa Claus suit. Parents became extremely vigilant, fearing that anyone dressed as Santa could be a potential threat to their children. The Holiday Plaza shopping center, once a joyful gathering place for the entire community, now became a haunting location where fear cast a shadow over every Christmas light. Immediately after receiving information about the disappearance, local police launched an investigation. They searched every corner of the shopping center, interrogated every employee and customer present that night. However, not a single clue led to the kidnapper. The security cameras had experienced technical difficulties on the night of the incident, failing to record any images of the man in the Santa suit or of Lily Thompson. The police faced an unsolvable case, leaving them feeling even more bewildered and powerless. During the investigation, police discovered some strange signs at the decoration store where Lily and Emily worked. A small piece of paper, written in black ink, was found near the area where the two girls often worked. The message read, "The miracle of Christmas Eve is not for everyone." This cryptic line further confused the investigators. who couldn't grasp its true meaning. Additionally, some witnesses reported seeing the man loitering around the shopping center in the days prior, but no one knew who he was or what his intentions were. The search for Lily Thompson lasted for weeks, even months, but there was no sign of the little girl. The police expanded their investigation to the entire Lakewood area, but all efforts were in vain. No one knew where Lily had been taken or where the kidnapper was hiding. The townspeople began to feel hopeless and lost faith in the police's ability to solve the case. Lily's disappearance became a dark legend in the hearts of Lakewood residents. Every Christmas season, the story of the sinister Santa Claus was retold as a warning, causing parents to become extremely cautious of anyone dressed as Santa. The Holiday Plaza shopping center gradually changed its decoration style, no longer filled with bright lights and vibrant Christmas trees. Instead, they focused on enhancing security, rigorously checking the identity of anyone wishing to enter the center, especially those portraying Santa Claus. The haunting of the abduction not only affected those directly involved, but also spread throughout the community. Families became hesitant to let their children go out alone on Christmas Eve, and many elderly people avoided encounters with Santa Claus to steer clear of potential risks. The image of Santa Claus, a symbol of joy and peace, was now overshadowed by darkness and fear. Even after many years, Lily Thompson's disappearance remained an unsolved mystery. People continued to recount the story as a warning about the dangers that could lurk behind harmless appearances. The shopping center employees and local residents still felt the haunting from that dark Christmas Eve, causing them to remain vigilant and anxious whenever the holiday season approached. While the investigation made no progress, fear and uncertainty continued to grip Lakewood, Georgia. The Holiday Plaza shopping center maintained its reputation, but the dazzling Christmas lights no longer brought a sense of peace. They became a symbol of loss and unspeakable horror, a reminder that sometimes miracles can carry unforeseen shadows. Thank you for joining us on this unsettling journey through Christmas horrors. These chilling tales remind us that even the most joyous seasons can hide shadows of darkness. If you found these stories intriguing and spine-chilling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Here at Enigma of the Unknown, we unravel the eerie and mysterious that lurks in the everyday. Until next time, remember, sometimes horror is just one holiday away. Sweet dreams, and be careful who's coming down your chimney.